Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that I have not met, I'm Rob McLeod, Alastair's middle son, and we will begin our program in about 5 minutes. So grab something to eat, grab a drink, grab a chair, and we will be back with you very shortly. Thanks. Oh. Good afternoon again. It's Rob, your MC. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us to celebrate our dad and his life, which was filled with so many relationships, obviously, and accomplishments. Dad was a father, husband, grandfather, son, brother, friend, neighbor, a colleague, fellow board member, a mentor, a professor, and in general, an all-around good guy. Really one of the good guys. Those various roles are attested to by the fact that the variety of people that are here today and the variety of people that have offered to say a few words. So, first, I would like to introduce Dr. Chi-Ho Hong, a former student of Dad's and fellow dermatologist at St. Paul's.
Thank you, everyone. First, I'd like to begin by offering my condolences to Dan and the McLeod family on this profound loss. But I'm here to talk about what I recall about Alastair and how I became a dermatologist at St. Paul's. Alastair was born in Saskatchewan, then moved to Edmonton, and then went to the prestigious Mayo Clinic, where he studied dermatology and dermatopathology. And then Alastair came to British Columbia and became the very first dermatologist at St. Paul's Hospital. And he trained successive generations of dermatologists, not only in Vancouver, but also across the country. And in preparation for this, I did send messages out to a number of people. So at the very end, I have some remembrances from other people from across the country. And the legacy that Alastair started at St. Paul's continues to this day. So in British Columbia, there's only a few hospitals that actually have a dermatology service, and St. Paul's Hospital is one of them. And it's basically because of the work that Alastair did to start the division. He did it with one other dermatologist for over 2 decades, I believe. And now when you look at the division, there's, I think, 9 of us. It takes 9 of us to do the work that basically Alastair did for 2 decades. So that's how we're a little soft now compared to when he worked. But I was fortunate enough to be a resident. I was a resident in the late 90s, early 2000s. So by that time, I believe Alastair was probably what most people would consider retirement age. And when I talked to some of the other dermatologists, I think they'd already softened him up a lot, because I don't think he was quite as intense with our cohort as he was with previous cohorts. But I trained doing mostly clinical dermatology by the time that I was a resident. His involvement in the area of dermatopathology had been more limited because we had a broader range of people at St. Paul's by that time. But I do recall speaking to people like Harvey Louis or David that learned pathology from Alastair. Those sessions were intense. Intense, I was told. So what I remember from Alastair was that he was an amazing clinician. He had a great command of dermatology. He was a great dermatologist. And when you're a 20-year-old resident, you go and you see this guy who's like retirement age, you figure, like, oh, this guy's out of date. He doesn't know what he's doing. But Alastair read every one of the relevant journals and could quote them to you, and he always knew the newest and most accurate treatments, and that was the thing that always blew me away. He really knew his stuff right till he stopped working. And he stopped working, I think, the day before his 80th birthday, because he said he would always retire before he's 80. So he worked, I think, until he's 79 years old and 355 days, and then he quit. Now, the family asked me to talk a little bit like what I remember about Alastair at work, because like they actually never got to see him at work. Just like as I was preparing this, I realized that, oh, my kids actually have no idea what I'm like at work. So I'd be a totally different person. They wouldn't actually know. Now, one of the things that I remember that I was preparing this was like Alastair was ahead of his time in how he dressed. Nowadays, it's not appropriate for male physicians to wear long sleeve shirts and ties when they're seeing patients because of the concern that sleeves and ties don't get cleaned properly and are a potential for transmitting bacteria and germs from one patient to another. So I remember Alastair always wore a short sleeve shirt. He always wore a short sleeve shirt. And the other thing Alastair did was he always wore this really fancy white lab coat. So he had a brand name, little short white lab coat that he would wear over top of his short sleeve shirt. And back then, it was unusual for an attending physician to wear a short lab coat because a short lab coat was what medical students had to wear. So if you were a medical student, you wore a short lab coat. All of the resident doctors and the attending physicians got to wear a long lab coat. But Alastair wore his little short, branded, fancy little lab coat with his short sleeve shirt and went to work. And I remember that coat very well because everyone sort of remembered it. The other thing that I remember about that coat was that in his one side pocket, he carried a little vial of bleomycin. Now, if you're not a doctor, you have no idea what this is, but bleomycin is an anti-cancer drug. And by the time I was in my training in the 90s, there were a lot of patients that had HIV and AIDS that weren't sick anymore. They had warts. And the warts that these patients had were very difficult to treat. And one of the few ways that you could successfully treat them was with bleomycin. Because Alastair had done so much work in HIV and AIDS medicine that he had a lot of patients that ended up having to come see him for his wart treatments. And he was one of the few physicians in one of the few clinics in British Columbia that would offer this treatment to actually try to clear these wart in patients. Now, when you were a resident working with Alastair in his clinic, one of the things was you had to be quick and you had to always pay attention to what he was saying. Because if you didn't catch what he was saying, there was no way that you could figure out what he was doing by reading his notes. So if you ever saw Alastair's notes, they were completely illegible. He had the absolute worst doctor's handwriting that I've ever seen. I have pretty bad doctor handwriting, but Alastair's doctor's handwriting was next level doctor handwriting. Now, I think that to work for him, you would have to take a special course on how to decipher what he actually wrote down. I remember when I was there as a resident, he had office staff was Vicky, and Vicky would have to translate what he wrote to the pharmacist and to the resident, because he would write stuff down and you would absolutely not know what it said at all. So I do remember that, and that's probably why it was the resident's job to write the note in the hospital chart, because if he wrote the note, you would have no idea. One of the other things I remember was that, his office was across the street from St. Paul's, so in the morning, you'd always see Alastair walking across for the morning rounds, see the morning patients, and do all the morning teaching before he would go back and see his scheduled patients. Now, he always carried a giant thermos with him in the morning, wherever he went. And it took me several months into my residency training before I realized what that was for. I thought he had this massive coffee habit, that he was carrying his thermos all the time. But then I realized that the thermos was for getting liquid nitrogen. And he'd go to the hospital to get the liquid nitrogen and bring it back. And I realized that I actually didn't like coffee that much, because one of the other things that people reminded me about was that every afternoon around 3 o'clock, clinic would stop. He would sit down in his office. There'd be patients in the patient rooms, and he'd go to his office, and then a tray would show up with a pot of tea, china cups, and little cookies. And you'd sit down for 5 minutes, and he would pour tea for you on fine bone china, and you'd have a little cookie for 5 minutes, and you just rest, and then you'd go back to see patients after that. I was telling Sheila earlier, we don't have fine china at home, so it's one of the few times in my life I've actually drank from a actual fine china cup. So I think that's something maybe all physicians should bring back to their office. Now, what I really remember most, and you're going to hear a lot about Alastair's contributions to HIV/AIDS medicine, that's definitely one of his large legacies in British Columbia, and Peter's going to talk a lot about that later. But I want to let you know that in that era, in the 80s, when HIV and AIDS was first kind of becoming, something that was recognized by medicine, This was a patient population that back then very few physicians wanted to be a part of. They didn't want to deal with these patients. And St. Paul's Hospital was really the epicenter of the HIV/AIDS epidemic starting in the 80s in Vancouver. And Alastair was such a compassionate man. He provided the care that was needed to patients that needed it most. And he continued that caring for that group of patients well beyond what he needed to do, because by the time the medications got better and better, the role of the dermatologist in HIV/AIDS care became less and less. And right to the end of his career, he was still incredibly involved in the HIV/AIDS program, and his work in that area will never be forgotten. He really, what I remember most about him in the office is that he was just such a compassionate man. It doesn't matter who came in to see him, he provided the care that they needed. It didn't matter if they were someone that was underhoused or was having a terrible personal situation. He just gave them the care that they needed. So I did ask a number of my colleagues, so these are some of the quotes that came in that was provided. Someone, best bedside manner I've ever seen. In clinic, he would talk to a patient for 5 minutes about something that they had interest in, like fishing, and then he'd be able to give them their prescription. He'd already made the diagnosis long ago. He just wanted to know more about that patient, make them comfortable to talk about something that they were both interested in. In the hospital, we would see that some of the sickest patients on the top floor where the HIV ward was, and he would just go in and sit and listen. He would say quiet words, and then he would ask gentle things of the patients. Never be crying or judgmental in any way, just full respect for the patient. And he was a fantastic speaker. His rounds were interesting, they were educational, he was funny, he was self-deprecating. Someone specifically mentioned his retirement speech at the dermatology dinner, how he was able to talk without any notes, and everyone just thought he gave such a great speech. And he was always available. Like I said, it takes like 8 or 9 of us to do the work that he did by himself. So he was always available for his patients and for students. And then lastly, one person wrote, and I think her note that she said, he's the reason I became a dermatologist. So I think this person was a student, and Alastair kind of mentored the person through medical training and on to dermatology residency. So from the dermies, so Diane calls us the dermies, so she always calls us the dermies, and so I want to thank the McLeod family for sharing Alastair with us for all these years. His professional legacy will continue to live on at the hospital that he basically founded the Division of Dermatology, and you can see all these people in the room that he helped train, and then there are many of us that weren't able to join us today, but his legacy will live on in the dermatology space for many years. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your eloquent words about your colleague and our dad. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Simon Wong, who's also a former student of Dad's and a dermatologist at St. Paul's, and who also took over Dad's consultation clinics up in the Yukon.
Thank you very much, Rob. Again, our condolences to the McLeod family, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak about Dr. McLeod and his contribution. And I just want to add to what Chio has said. I remember as a medical student in the early 90s as well that, on the ward when Dr. McLeod was called, we kind of knew that he's going to help us out and figure out what the heck was going on, and that we wouldn't have to keep continuing to struggle. So I was fortunate to see him during that time. I was a medical student, and then I became a family physician for a while before I came back. So I kind of had a chance to see how he had transitioned over the years. And really, as Gio mentioned, probably I think a lot of my prior colleagues had really softened him up. And I saw a very different side of him during clinics and everything. And one of the other things I wanted to point out, I didn't tell Chio about during our time at St. Paul's was, I remember coming on as a junior staff, and then there was a time, I think all of you know that St. Paul's is going to be moving, right, at some point, and that there's going to be a new St. Paul's. And I still remember that when we were invited to go take a look at the mock-up for what the clinics will be like, that I myself, as well as a few others, were very excited that we got a chance to see what the new facilities are like. And I still remember Alastair just sitting in the corner, just chuckling a little bit, and I asked him, why are you chuckling, Alastair? And he goes, Simon, they've been talking about a new St. Paul's for the longest time. He says, don't get too excited. He said, you'll be lucky when you retire that the new St. Paul's will be ready to go. I think it shows his insights how, unfortunately, how hospital administration and how a lot of these things work. I do think that we'll probably see it before I retire, although I think he's getting very close to that part. Having said that, I am here to talk about what I've taken over, and I didn't realize when Alastair asked me to see if I would consider going up to Whitehorse that he was actually succession planning a little bit. So I finished in the my return to residency in the early 2000s, and then I was fortunate to be asked by him to go up there. And I just want to read the little excerpt from the Yukon Medical Association. I don't know if any of you were privy to it. This was the announcement when they found out about Alastair's passing. It said, Dear colleagues, though I am saddened to share the news of the peaceful passing of Dr. Alastair McLeod this weekend at the age of 89, Dr. McLeod provided visiting specialty dermatology service to Yukoners for 30 years. He was generously available by phone and was enthusiastic with his feedback regarding high quality of referrals from the Yukon family physicians. So our community was well supported by his excellent service. He was at the forefront of recognizing Kaposi sarcoma in several gay young men in Vancouver during the emergence of AIDS and served on various advisory boards. He played an integral part in developing the investigation and the treatment of AIDS. Dr. McLeod survived by his family. We wish his family comfort and togetherness in this time of grief, and it was signed by Alex Kmet, the current Yukon Medical Association president. And I thought, that kind of really summarizes what Alastair has been doing and what Kachio had already commented on. I think Alastair's service up to Yukon was very much similar to his dedication down here in BC, and the Yukoners were very fortunate and very thankful that he was there. And I remember him telling me that I would really enjoy working up there because having previously been a family physician, he thought that I would integrate very well into that very tight community up there. And definitely, Alastair was correct. So long as I was able to lay out a plan for them, because they were so involved in their patients' day-to-day lives, it was actually in some ways a lot easier to provide a consultative service up there than in some ways down here. Because, when doctors have sent the referral, they kind of knew exactly what the patients were, what their needs were, and really it was really a matter of fine-tuning or providing some advanced therapies that they had a chance to try. And I noticed that, when I talked to Alastair, and when I asked him initially, well, why were you going up? What led you to go up there? And he basically said to me that it was because of the fact that the patients up there, number one, had a need, much like he saw the need in the HIV community. There weren't many people that were able to provide the service and to go up there. And at the same time, because the doctors up there were so caring and were willing to do a lot of the harder work, it was really easy for them to provide that extra information that they needed. And he kind of said, towards the end of his service up there, some of the patients were remembering that, he's spending even more time asking them about how their day-to-day lives were. And at the same time, sometimes got so involved in speaking about what things were like for the patients and how their lives were, he sometimes had to be reminded that he had to still give him this prescription, because he was enjoying it so much. And knew that the staff up there as well knew that Alastair was really able to spend the time and ask patients how they were, and that a lot of the treatment was beyond just the medicines and the prescriptions themselves. It really was about trying to help the whole patient. And he also mentioned that, his eyes sparkled a bit too when he mentioned all the great friends he has made up there, both, in terms of patients as well as colleagues that he has been spending a lot of time with. The big challenge I found when I took over completely for Alastair was I had to remind the docs up there, I'm not as well trained as Alastair was. I'm not a dermatopathologist. The old days, if they had any issues with the pathologies they didn't understand, Alastair would be able to actually just walk across the street, pull the slides from the pathology department, and he would just phone them and tell them, look, this is what's going on. And so there were times when they would phone me and say, hey, can you look at that path? And I had to say, I'm so sorry. Number one, I don't think they'll let me into the pathology department and just grab slides because I didn't know what to pull. And second of all, after the initial training, sorry to Dr. Crawford, but there are a lot of blue dots and red dots that I see. And that's probably about all I would recognize. So I have to remind them that I do still need to rely on pathology colleagues now that I'm up there providing the consultative service. And so it was very interesting that, Alastair really did do it all. And I do find out when I'm seeing a patient up there, and also my own private practices now, that, if I saw something that I really thought, is this something that I can do or I should do? I remember spending time in Alastair's office and just realizing, hey, you know what? Didn't question it. If it was something that he thought he could do, he would do. And I apologize to those of you who are not in medicine, but certainly there were patients who had a lot of genital warts, and I still remember Alastair would just pull out the anoscope and he would put it in and take a look at everything, and I was just like, he is the only dermatologist I know that would do that. And now I'm just like, okay, if I see something, I don't have anoscopes in my office, but I will go and I will do a little more, just because, as Alastair has always said, it's for the patient. If we don't look after them, who will? And that's really stuck with me. And so I think that the important thing to let everybody know is that he was very well loved in the Yukon. The Yukon community really misses him. They miss the conversations they have with him. Doing my best, myself and Dr. Dadwal, as Chio says, it's about 9 of us to do it down here. Fortunately, it takes 2 of us right now to do that, the roll up there. But I will say the wait list is definitely a lot longer than when Alastair was running the show up there. So, thank you very much. It's been a joy and it's a privilege to try to do what he has done, and I will endeavor to continue to maintain the service up to the Yukon. Thanks.
Thanks so much. That was a great insight and an even better understanding of the impact that our dad had up north. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Phillips, an infectious disease specialist based at St. Paul's Hospital, who worked with Dad over the years in the HIV/AIDS area.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here and see a lot of familiar from years ago faces. I echo condolences to the family for your great loss. I first had the pleasure of meeting Alastair in the early 80s when I was a medical resident at St. Paul's. And after a few years away doing infectious diseases fellowship training, I returned and had the good fortune to work with Alastair on the AIDS care team in the late 1980s. And I'm just going to try to paint a picture for you as to how things were in those days and highlight where Alastair has fit in with respect to the history of St. Paul's, which is detailed in a remarkable document. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I think this is must reading for anyone who has anything to do with St. Paul's. And even if you don't, it is a 250-page document that's online. It's the Providence Healthcare Archive and Museum. It's very easy to find it. It's very well illustrated, and it's really a chronicle of the tremendous advances in medical care that have taken place over the last 100+ years through the eye, the lens of St. Paul's Hospital. and how these developments and advances were received and managed, and in some cases originated from St. Paul's. And I'm going to refer to the document because Alastair is frequently referenced in the archives. And there's no substitute for really looking at it. I only discovered it a few years back, and I wish someone had drawn my attention to it earlier. So Alastair was recruited in the 60s with a number of other very promising young stars who came to St. Paul's under the direction of Dr. Hobart, who was the physician-in-chief and became the head of the Department of Medicine. Some 15 or so years after Alastair was at St. Paul's in the early 80s, the HIV patients started going up. And then increasing numbers through the early 80s, St. Paul's, being in the West End, received the majority of these patients. And increasingly, as the cases became more numerous, it became clear to John Rudy, who was the head of medicine, we need a more structured response to the epidemic. And the AIDS Care Clinical Group was established. Alastair was appointed the chairman. And sometime not long after that, Julio Montana was appointed as the head of the AIDS research program. And the AIDS Care Group was a gathering of multidisciplinary group that included nursing, social work, community outreach, pharmacy, and psychiatry, various physicians who were most impacted by the epidemic, particularly respirology, oncology, dermatology, psychiatry, infectious diseases, and so on. And we meet on a weekly basis, and this is when the numbers were getting higher and higher in the late 80s and the early 90s. I know this is at a time that some of you younger people don't have as much of a feel for it as those of us who are somewhat older, but this was a remarkably tough time with patients who were suffering the sort of dual disclosure situation of a new diagnosis of HIV, which at that time was a fatal disease, and the disclosure of sexual orientation, which was often something that wasn't apparent necessarily to friends and family. And the stigma was intense. And it was even worse, particularly in the first several years of the epidemic, because of the contagion fear before it became established that this was not something that was transmitted by casual contact. And so the reluctance to get involved with medical care in these patients was huge. And so that is just what I wanted to put in the background for you. But in terms of what the AIDS Care Group did, we'd meet on a weekly basis and go over the patients in the hospital. Late 80s, early 1900s, or 1990s. On any given day, there were between 25 and 35 patients in the hospital. We'd lost, on average, one a day. And this went on for a number of years. Very dark times. Alastair, as the chairman, did a remarkable job in convening the group on a regular basis every week. Numerous management issues were addressed both with respect to in-hospital and community aspects of care for this population. And his determination and optimism helped keep people in a positive space. And that was so important because there was no light at the end of the tunnel in those days. Antiretroviral, monotherapy, dual therapy was coming along, not much change in survival. And then thankfully in the 95, 96, highly active antiretroviral therapy arrived, and the rest is history that you know well. So it was during those very tough times that Alastair was a beacon for all of us. And although I was never a formal student of Alastair's, if one worked alongside Alastair, you were a student, because he had so much to offer. So I would just like to go back to the archives and just, you don't have to take my word for it. This guy's, maybe his memory is fading a little bit, maybe he's getting a little emotional, he's exaggerating things. So you can fact check me. And in this era of disinformation, it's probably a good idea. And you're going to do that by going to the archives. I've even given you the link, basically, to fact check me. That doesn't happen all the time. So this is from Julio Montana, director of the research program. And this is a quote that he gave to the archives. The board and Sisters of Providence were very supportive all along of St. Paul's being there and being counted on when it came to dealing with these AIDS patients who were in severe need. The chairman of the Department of Medicine, John Rudy, made it clear from day one that we were staying in this business and looking after these people. Dr. Alastair McLeod played a key role in providing clinical leadership to the AIDS care group. Along the same lines as stated by Maxine Davis to the archives. She was a former director of the Dr. Peter AIDS Foundation, and she said that St. Paul's stepped up at a time when most hospitals across the country were not prepared to give people diagnosed with AIDS, HIV care. In 1992, the BC Center for Excellence in HIV/AIDS was opened and established at St. Paul's. And Dr. Michael O'Shaughnessy was recruited from the National Virology Laboratory in Ottawa to be the first director of the CFE. He was interviewed by the archivist group, and what he had to say about those days was the decision to accept AIDS patients at St. Paul's was made by Al McLeod and John Rudy. The reality was that they were the most unbiased people, two of the most unbiased people in the world. Until the day I die, I will respect the work they did. Now, despite all this dark time, Alastair maintained a sense of humor. And in addition to his other attributes of being an outstanding clinician, educator, and administrator, his humor was a real plus. And I remember he was giving a dermatology update to a general medical audience, and many of whom were physicians who referred patients to Alastair. And he started by explaining that the majority of his referrals were related to diagnostic uncertainty around various rashes. And he won them over by sympathizing with them as he showed them a slide of a nest of about a dozen salamanders. And he said, you know, baby salamanders, they're just like rashes. Only their mother can tell them apart. And just to close, I'll turn back to the archives. And this is on the last page of the archives. It's a quote that addressed St. Paul's in total, and it's 130 years since it was established by the Sisters of Providence in the 1890s. And he said that what makes St. Paul's different is a set of humanistic values that come out of a strong and rich religious tradition. It's the culture of caring, a deep commitment to patient care and to one another that has existed for over a century. And no question that sums it up. That's end of quote. But that commitment to culture of caring doesn't just keep going, because it was started in 1890s by the Sisters of Providence. It's something that their mission continues because of the ongoing recruitment of people like Alastair, who provide guidance and the pathway for those of us who follow. We will very much miss Alastair. He's been a huge asset to St. Paul's, and he's all over the archives. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter, for highlighting the pioneering work that yourself and our dad and the St. Paul community did in terms of the AIDS and HIV. We'd also like to thank those of you that have contributed to the St. Paul's Lights of Hope in honor of our dad with a gold star. We understand that I suspect over $35,000 was raised in his name, supporting programs at Providence Healthcare, and we just want to say thank you, and that's really, really impressive. I suspect we could have had even more former colleagues speaking today, but I think the three of you perfectly captured Dad's passion and commitment to his profession and to his community. And thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Dad's passion and commitment also extended to his family. So I'd like to hand it over to Diane to say a few words.
Thanks, Rob. As the previous doctors have attested, not only was he a brilliant and witty physician, but he was very handy. And when we had this dirt road down from his cabin down to the fire pit and then down on Lillooet Lake, well, when I developed multiple sclerosis and could no longer safely navigate it, he built stairs, and not only stairs, but a handrail, so that I could navigate down to the fire pit, down to the lake. And then, when I became paralyzed, he ramped the cabin, and my cabin up outside of Princeton, and the house. He was very handy. And because I could no longer take a shower by stepping over the tub and using the shower, he plumbed an outdoor shower onto the patio so I could have a shower outdoors. He was wonderfully handy. And this at a time when I was seeing other of my colleagues with multiple sclerosis, their husbands were dropping off with divorce and things like this because they couldn't handle it. Alastair was steadfast as northern lights. He stuck by me through thick and thin, and it was quite wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Now I'd like to introduce my brother John for his insightful comments.
What did the neighbors think of that shower, Diane? Hi, everyone. I'm John, Alastair's youngest son. Thanks for coming. Big thank you to my wife, Sarah, who put together this slideshow. The second McLeod family celebration of life slideshow that Sarah's put together in the last couple of months, so we really appreciate it. Dad's face would always light up when Sarah would come in the room, and he definitely thought of Sarah as his daughter. Thanks also to Dad's colleagues for speaking. I had to remind myself I was in my dad's celebration of life. There's just this dichotomy between professional life and family life, and I know you've mentioned that you're looking forward to hearing about the family part, and I really appreciated hearing about the professional part and the depth of his relationships and his accomplishments. So thanks so much for that. Some of you have had the pleasure of reading Dad's Christmas letters over the years. If you have, you've experienced Dad's witty side. My comments today are intended to pay tribute to Dad's sharp wit. So it would be quite appropriate for you to laugh if and when you recognize that I've made a joke. I'll start with just a few of the memories that are etched in my mind about Dad. One is his mummy pose when taking afternoon naps. On weekend, his what would he call the 15-minuters, which he was a remarkable napper. Dad's dictation voice, which was just an octave lower and a bit more serious than his normal voice. And we could hear that emanating from his den or his office if we were in the office. His amazing jovial manner with patients. I used to do, for a while, some of Dad's billing. I'd do the entries, punching in billing codes and a brief description of each diagnosis. I recall struggling mightily with the correct spelling of seborrheic dermatitis, which I'm sure I pronounced wrong. As I typed away, I would overhear Dad in his consult rooms with his patients and plenty of his trademark guffaws and chuckles, as we used to say. His joviality would give way to stern parenting when he would walk by my workstation and remind me that I'd be doing data entry for the rest of my life if I didn't work harder in school. He was very right, and I should have worked harder in school. I have a distinct memory of Dad passing vehicles on the Sea to Sky Highway up to the cabin. This is before there were 2 lanes most of the way, so Dad would get impatient behind slow drivers. And when an opportunity to pass arose, we would know he would reposition himself in the seat, grab on a 10 and 2, and just get ready for the pass. And then he would go for it, often laying on the horn, exclaiming, "Jesus!" and then finishing the deed with a little chuckle. I always have been, and I remain, a huge Canucks fan. Dad would buy 10 game packs up in the greens at Pacific Coliseum. We'd take the bus from Ambleside out to the game. I have fond memories of Dad reading the Lucky Number program and eating a bag of peanuts, which were not shelled. So he would have this pile of shells under his seat when we would leave the game. As we've heard, Dad did a lot for others. He asked very little in return, I found. He was the same with his family, a very committed provider for his family, not the best financial planner. But for us kids, you got what you needed when you needed it. For me, when I wanted to take up the drums, I received what's called a practice pad for Christmas. A practice pad is a little round pad that you hit with drumsticks to make barely audible monotone drumming sounds. $20, no noise, very unlikely to get me hooked on the drums. Quite a clever strategy, really. For my older brother Rob, the MC, getting what you needed when you needed it meant the largest bedroom in the house, closest to the bathroom, 2 walk-in closets with skylights. I'm not bitter at all. I promise that's the last time I'll use that joke. There's no way I'll keep that promise. Like many families, our family had some bumps along the road. Mom and Dad separated in the late 70s. After their separation, or shortly after their separation, Dad was a single father of 4. We all started doing our own laundry. We'd set a rotation of dinners. We could inform Dad's weekly grocery shopping list. On Friday evenings, when other dermatologists were cracking their latest edition of Q's magazine and wondering whether their photo made the cover, Dad went to Woodward's to grocery shop, always bringing home some treats with staples. While the accounts of Dad's professional accomplishments were great to hear, we all know the best source of facts about doctors is Rate My MD. For Dad, the ratings are almost entirely positive. I'll read just one that I think captures the essence of his professionalism from a patient's perspective. Great doctor. He can zero in on the patient's problems with skill and speed, so patient and takes time to explain conditions and recommend a course of treatment. Professional, kind, and empathetic. He may be nearing retirement, however, I hope he never does. He's an icon in patient care. Another review posted in 2011 actually suggested Dad maybe should retire. This person mused that Dad knew Moses personally. It is not true. Dad did not know Moses personally. Interestingly, that review was posted when Dad was only 77 years old. He practiced for 3 more years after that post. Dad was born in Moosomin, Saskatchewan, grew up in the Garneau area of Edmonton. It's hard to gauge whether Dad's upbringing contributed to his professional success. Dad's mom, Danny, as we called her, was a burnt toast eating, chain smoking school principal, a softie with her grandkids, no doubt, but maybe a tough cookie as a mom. I'm guessing here, but I don't think there was a lot of I love yous in that house. I'm sure it was a loving household, but maybe not openly so. Dad was Scottish on both sides, his mom and dad's side. Like his mom, he was fairly true to the 5 hallmarks of Scottish culture: frugality, bland food, lack of fashion sense, dry humor, and never ever expressing emotion other than measured rage. Like Dad's childhood home, we did not hear a lot of I love yous in our house growing up, in birthday cards for sure, but for God's sake, not spoken out loud. Despite having Scott on both sides, somehow our 3 girls from a young age have said I love you a lot. From time to time, they would say I love you to their grandparents, including my dad, at the end of a visit. By their reaction, you would have thought the girls had tasered them. They'd fumble for their keys, stumble towards the door, uttering, of course, I better go and beat the traffic. About 10 years ago, we celebrated Dad's 80th birthday, which could have doubled as a retirement party. The whole family was there, including Doug's wife and daughter, Diane and Cameron, up from Texas. Dad, wearing, I recall, was a wonderfully mismatched outfit, rose to give a little speech after dinner. He was clearly very happy to be surrounded by family. It was apparent to me that for most of that speech, Dad was trying to tell us that he loved us. He struggled with the words, like fondly trying to admit to Mrs. Cunningham that he was wrong about something. Pretty amazing, really. Dad could give a diagnosis to the Dalai Lama. He could tell countless people they had incurable herpes, not the Dalai. But those 3 words were tough. Of course, that evening we knew what he was saying, trying to say, and we all know that he loved us very much. My brother insisted that he have a bug in my ear to censor me. He's telling me I'm not supposed to mention patient names, but it could be any Dalai Lama, not necessarily His Holiness the Dalai Lama. If he wants to sue, he can sue Dad in his reincarnated form. I just want to conclude my comments by giving a quick shout out to my siblings. Despite our bumps in the road and turbulent times, my siblings stuck with Dad to the end. They showed Dad the meaning of true love. Soon after retiring, Dad began to lose his physical capacity. As he increasingly struggled to walk, his life mantra shifted to, "This is the shits," which I can understand. He was losing the ability to use his cabin and walk, and it was a tough time. During this stage of my dad's life, my oldest brother, Doug, who passed away a couple of months ago, would accompany Dad on trips to Lillooet Lake. Doug would drive, they'd do a grocery shop at Whistler. Doug would chip away at Dad's endless list of projects at the cabin. Doug extended Dad's window for using the cabin by several years, which was really great. My other siblings would have frequent visits with Dad at South Granville Park Lodge, taking him for walks, coffee, lunch, and just sitting with him in the park. Rob would even sing to Dad. Just kidding, that was Sheila. In any event, I know Dad felt that love, and I know he loved us back. So thanks again for being here. It means an awful lot. Cheers.
Thanks, Jay. Tough act to follow. But I will now move on to my short tribute. Impressive group of speakers highlighting Dad's passion and commitment to his profession and his community, so thank you very much for that. Of course, my perspective is not about Dr. McLeod, but just simply about Dad, the guy who is always committed to his family. Of course, commitment shows up in many forms and perhaps unexpected ways. And I have just a few stories revealing that commitment. The first one combines Dad's commitment to his profession and his family. When I was 12, we were up at the cabin. I was diligently, if not expertly, doing a little wood carving with the set that come with the cabin. This set included a few aptly named gougers. You see where I'm going with this. Unfortunately, I did not see where I was going with this and ended up with a gouge in the side of my knee. A surprising lack of blood suggested that it was a simple abrasion of the skin, but Dad's expert diagnostic experience suggested otherwise. No doubt confirmed by the perfect view of my bone through that abrasion. Stitches were the recommended course action, however, the nearest clinic was an hour away in Whistler. Solution: do-it-yourself, at-home stitches using tailoring thread and a barbless fishing hook. No local anesthetic, because there was none. So it was 4 stitches, 0 tears, and 1 scar. And you can hardly see the scar, especially as I get older and eyesight diminishes. Yeah, it was really a true example of Dad being creative and calm as he took care of issues. Dad was always calm and rarely got upset. But when he did, you knew it was serious. I recall one of those rare occasions. I brought home my first term grade 11 report card that included a C+ in chemistry class. And no, that wasn't the highest mark on the report card, it was one of the lower ones. Dad carefully explained in an elevated voice that I could not expect to be accepted to university with marks like that. Ah, says a naive 16-year-old, I didn't know you had to be accepted to university. I thought you just went to university. It seemed like Sheila had just simply went to university, albeit with thousands of dollars of scholarships and probably early acceptance when she was like 12, hence my confusion. So Dad's elevated voice did the trick. I did get accepted to university, not early acceptance, but accepted nonetheless, and correct, 0 scholarships. At that point, we were living with Dad in the Sinclair Street house, so it was 1 parent, 4 kids, 2 dogs. Talk about a commitment. Dad had withdrawn from his involvement with journal clubs, medical boards, community groups, and professional engagements so that he could look after the household and learn a few new skills, 2 of those being meal planning and grocery shopping. Each week, we'd sit down with Dad to figure out the menu for the following week. And of course, the menus were dependent on who was going to be there each night, what they would or would not eat, and perhaps most importantly, what each of us could or could not cook. Presto, a meal plan and a grocery list. It was really a precursor to the HelloFresh meal delivery app, but without the web, and without the delivery, and without the pre-done meal planning. But otherwise, like a missed opportunity for fame and fortune for Dad. So as you heard, Dad would then journey down to Woodward's at Park Royal to do grocery shopping, and invariably, there would be some ingredient or note on the grocery list that even he couldn't decipher because of his less than stellar handwriting. And inevitably, Dad would then take the list into the office the next morning to have his secretaries, the girls, translate the notes for him, which they were always able to do. So Dad was willing to learn new skills, even when they weren't particularly intellectually challenging, and not that rewarding, given the lack of gratitude that a bunch of teenagers would express. And we were typical teenagers, which Dad was resigned to and accepted with a few rules. One of those rules was whoever came home last at night, if it was after Dad went to bed, that kid had to bolt the back door. A creature of habit, Dad went to bed around 10 p.m. following the CBC News and walking the dogs up to the top of the street. And of course, a couple of us would not be home by then, so Dad left a list of our names on the kitchen table for us to cross off as we came home. And of course, if your name was last on the list to be crossed off, you bolted the back door. Of course, if you did not make it home that night, it was obvious to Dad in the morning because your name was not crossed off the list and the back door was unbolted. It was really a precursor to those track your kids app. Another missed opportunity. Even with those missed opportunities for app development, Dad did a good job providing for the family financially, always supporting our endeavors. Although I do recall a satisfied grin on Dad's face at the family meeting where he announced that we were all responsible for paying for our post-secondary education, based on the fact that Sheila had done it with scholarships. Ah, says the now naive 17-year-old, not only do I need to be accepted to university, but I have to pay for it. Who knew? Anyways, as I said, Dad did a good job financially providing for the family. It probably would have been a great job, not just a good job, if Dad had not been cajoled into making some odd and sometimes financially dubious investments. As he once told me, you'll do great if you look at what I do and then invest in the opposite. One memorable investment was the multiple unit rental buildings, or MERBs, in the late 70s that somehow sold itself on high development costs that you could write off and annual rental losses that you would then offset your taxable income. Once again, Dad was insightful and correct. I now invest based on the opposite business criteria. Another one was Dad's investment in an agricultural business in Arizona. Yes, an agricultural business in the desert. You can already see the red flashing sign, do the opposite. But jojoba oil was going to be the next super skincare product. And Dad was really pleased with his investment because he got a free trip to Arizona as he could write off the cost. Not understanding that even with a 50% marginal tax rate, the trip was still not free. Those are just a few of the stories revealing Dad's commitment to his family, teaching us how to get things done, what was important, and all of us also what not to do, which all of us still take to heart every day. Thank you. Now let me introduce my sister Sheila with a lovely perspective on our dad's life.
Okay. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much for coming out and sharing this time with us. Okay, I call this, it's a sort of a eulogy that I call getting to know my dad. Reading through the incredible tributes that UBC and St. Paul's wrote about Dad was inspiring and eye-opening for me. Dad helped so many people as a master of his dermatology trade, as a compassionate caregiver, devoted mentor, fearless leader, and profound intellectual. These tributes were also a source of great reflection as I pondered how I came to know Dad. The first stage of getting to know Dad would have been from my earliest memories, say around age 4, until the time my parents separated in the summer between grade 10 and 11, which was 1978. I didn't seem to connect with Dad much in those days, which I didn't really notice at the time as I immersed myself in a wonderful childhood. But with all Dad was doing at work, I can now see why he wasn't around a lot. He was a pretty introverted fellow and must have been exhausted by the time he got home from work, needing time to himself to recharge. I remember Dad getting home from work and sitting in the living room to eat his dinner with Mom, watch the news, and read the newspaper. After dinner, he would organize his slides for an upcoming presentation or head downstairs to work on one of his amazing woodworking projects. I'd say goodnight before bed and have a bit of a chat, and then Dad would finish up what he was working on, take the dogs for a walk, have his shower, and hit hay. He was a man of routines. He'd be gone before we got up in the morning. When I was in elementary school, I remember Dad devoting a weekend morning each week to the four of us as we headed off to Stanley Park or went swimming at Hollyburn. And we would always have Sunday dinner together in the dining room, surrounded by the furniture that Mom and Dad had refinished. We would enjoy more time with Dad on our family holidays, especially camping at Whatcom Lake in the rain, or at his beloved cabin on the Lillooet Lake. At the cabin, we would enjoy Dad's blueberry pancakes and barbecuing, or grab a swim or drive into Pemberton together when he wasn't immersed in a project, or reading his popular mechanics, the newspaper, or books on astronomy. The second phase of getting to know Dad would have started in the summer of 1978, after Mom and Dad announced they were separating, and for the 6 years after that, before I moved in with Brad. I knew Dad was devastated at the idea of separating and moving out in 2 weeks. I can still remember going downstairs to Dad's workshop during those 2 weeks to say goodnight, and Dad saying he loved me through tear-filled eyes. The only time I remember Dad using his voice to say that he loved me. After a year of living on his own with Jungle Jim, which was an ivy plant that's lived for like 30 years, Dad seemed thrilled and maybe a little overwhelmed to be moving back in with the four of us. I can see from the tribute that St. Paul's prepared that in that year, which was 1979, Dad stepped down from the medical advisory and audit committees, which really puts in perspective his request for me to not play volleyball and basketball that year in order to help around the house. I acquiesced on the volleyball front, but by basketball season, we had all found our groove, and Dad had met Eileen, his friend that was a girl, and bought Flash, his non-family wagon that was a red sports car. Just like most everything else in Dad's life, he managed our household beautifully and took great care of us. During this time, I actually discovered Dad's amazing prowess for napping, his 15-minuters, as John alluded to, when at the end of the day at the office, as I finished off the books, I would hear a sudden pause in Dad's dictating. 15 minutes later, Dad would continue on dictating exactly where he left off. The next phase of getting to know Dad would have been when Dad got busy with his second family after marrying Diane in 1987 and raising his cherished daughter Elizabeth from her birth in 1988. During those years, we would have family get-togethers at Christmas and Dad's birthday, and occasionally get together at our place or the cabin with our boys. I remember in my late 40s reading Dad's Christmas letters and being astonished to see a wonderful sense of humor emanating from those pages. Seeing that sense of humor come true seemed to be the first step in getting to know Dad at a deeper level. The most special stage of our connection would have begun gradually after his retirement, as we've heard, at the age of 80, as dementia began to rob him of his capacity to do the things that he loved to do. Particularly after Dad moved into Granville Park Lodge in 2018, when I could see his passionate nature shine through and he became more readily available to me. I remember so fondly the glow he took on as his caregivers at the lodge told the story of how he knelt down to hold the head of a man who had fallen out of his wheelchair, still loving to give service. Or when he would raise his one eyebrow, give me a quirky smile, and pretend to slap my hand to let me know that his sense of humor was alive and well and that he didn't want my help. Or after he lost his ability to speak, when he would unconditionally wave at people in the lodge and reach out to hold their hand as we wheeled by, and we were greeted with, "Hi, Doc," or when he would reach out his hand to me as I departed the lodge. Or in his final weeks, as I would look up from my regular perch on a milk crate in the doggy park to sing to him, and he would look at me with his beautiful clear blue eyes and seem to look right into my soul with such compassion. For those brief moments, his body seemed to stop spasming, and he would nod to let me know that he enjoyed Amazing Grace and wanted me to sing it again. And last but not least, when I was in Montreal and the day that Dad died, and walked to Notre Dame Cathedral, where a very kind person allowed us in after hours to have a quiet moment. As I sat peacefully with my eyes closed, reflecting on Dad, an image of Dad at the cabin came to me. Dad was wearing his old blue jean jacket, which was his cabin uniform, and he had a beautiful, radiant smile. Those are the gifts of love that Dad gave me. I wrote this poem on a teary ferry ride home after one of my singing visits with Dad. It's called I'm Still Here. I look into your beautiful blue eyes from below. They speak of fear and love. What is happening to me? Why can I not walk? Why can I not speak? Why can I not swallow? My body is changing. My essence has not changed. I fear the change that is beyond my control. My anger still cannot articulate my fears. My deeds still cannot articulate my love. My eyes emote fear and love. I am here behind these blue eyes. I always have been. Thank you all very much for coming out to support us and celebrate our dad. And Liz? So, Elizabeth is going to come up and say a few words.
Okay, so I'm gonna try not to cry, because we all know crying leads to nose stuff, and we don't like that up here. And I have two things. One is a letter I wrote from my dad. That's a goodbye. Oh, it's already starting. Let's not. Dear Dad, I have been dreading writing this because it makes it too real. There are so many memories flowing through my head. I could ramble on about you for a lifetime, and I'm sure I will, just maybe not right now. You were my rock, my wisdom, my voice of reason. Now that you're gone, you will continue to be that. Although now I'm going to actually have to listen to it because it's a bit harder to argue with you and rebel. You're a jerk. I love you and miss you so much. Until we meet again. Which might be a little wild, because we all know he went up there, and my spot up there is questionable. Love from your daughter, Liz. Thank you. We all know how wonderfully amazing and funny my dad was. Compassionate, kind, and willing to help even if maybe I didn't want it. Sprinkle in a little bit of spicy temper and and that's the man who raised me. Now, I will be the first one to admit, I deserved that temper. The absolute terror teen me put that man through. Oh my goodness. The first team of his kids definitely paved the way. They started the movement of breaking him down. And then I came in to finish the job. As some of you know, I took this job very seriously. For example, I, a 16-year-old, maybe 15-year-old, somehow convinced Dr. Alastair McLeod to sign off on an eyebrow piercing under one condition, that I never get my lips pierced ever. And I'm sure how you can see that turned out. That was the first moment of real disappointment, and boy, did it set the bar. Like when me and Katrina, who's over there, still teenagers, by the way, were out in front, Mom, close your ears, smoking. It's legal now, okay? Out front, which in hindsight, why didn't we just like walk around the block or something? Like, what's up? But I digress. As soon as we sparked it, out comes Dad, super happy, about to do yard work. We turn and look at him. Direct eye contact. Then the moment that he realized what was going on, he slowly backed away and didn't want anything to do with it. He was the most patient man. I can sure think of many moments like these, but let's cut to when I realized my job was done. It was magical. I was in my 20s and I had come over for a visit. He asked me what was new. I told him I got 3 tattoos and not to tell Mom. And to my shock, he said, "Oh, what are they?" No reaction. Neither negative, which is what I was expecting, or positive, which, was never going to be that. I asked him why he was fine with it, and he said, "Liz, there's only so many times you can break a man down until he just has to accept it." So that was it. My job was done. I was very proud of myself. And I made note to him in that moment that there was no returns or exchanges. He was stuck with me. As soon as I said that, he laughed and rolled his eyes. And if you knew him, you know that laugh. That very, very infectious laugh. He loved all of his kids so much. We were his pride and joy. Now it's my turn. It's my turn to forever have the honor of calling him my dad. So, to my dad, my hero, the most amazing dad anyone could ever ask for, he rests in peace.
Thanks, Liz. That was awesome. Now it is my pleasure to introduce five of Dad's 6 grandchildren that have a few things to say.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Just to echo what everyone else has said, thanks so much for coming. It means a lot. My name is McLeod. I'm John and Sarah's eldest daughter and one of Alastair's 6 grandchildren. And I'm joined up here by my sisters, Annie and Georgia, and my cousins, Andrew and Fraser. And our cousin Cameron, who lives in Iowa, wasn't able to be here in person today, but these words are from her as well. So we've organized this as a letter to our grandpa in the hopes that he has his hearing aids turned on and he's listening from wherever he may be. So here goes. Dear Grandpa, you are so many things in your life: a father, a husband, a doctor, a teacher, an amateur astronomer, personal dermatologist to the Dalai Lama, a self-taught electrician, purveyor of expired condiments, but to us, you were mostly just Grandpa. The way you lived and the way you grandpa'd taught us some important lessons that we've decided to share with you and all of these wonderful people who love you. So, lesson number 1, appreciate the world around you. So being able to spend time at Lillooet Lake with you was a highlight of my childhood summers. Jumping in and out of the frigid water, paddling around in the canoe, going for walks in the forest, learning to fish, the mountains, the trees, the water, the worms, the bears, and the osprey. For me, these experiences kindled a strong ethic of care for the earth that guides me in my life today. And although I never got a chance to talk to you about it, I like to think it's something that you maybe shared. Whether it be your long walks or your cold plunges, your stargazing or your cabin yearning, you had an appreciation and care for the world around you and people in it, and you gave us the opportunity to learn this too.
Like Ali, some of my favorite memories happened at the cabin with you. I fondly remember our outdoor cabin adventures, picking blueberries, swimming down the lake, and especially feeding the Sellers jays. there was this massive bag of peanuts that you had stashed away in the cabin that you'd lug out to the porch every time the kids came up. Hours were spent, or at least what seemed like hours in my 5-year-old brain, were spent delicately arranging the peanuts around the porch railings. Sometimes we do groups of 2 or 3 lined up. Sometimes we got a little wild and piled them up in corners and watched the stellar jays all mat them. And after our designs were complete, I'd rush inside and stick out the porch, delighted as the jays came and went with their peanuts. I also have fond memories of gardening and rooting around in the compost pile, enough to warrant a solid dunk in the lake afterwards. And I love searching for worms and planting flowers. I guess it's no surprise to you today that I'm still looking at the small things and studying insect ecology in school right now.
And I'll be doing lesson 2, which is you don't need to be an expert in something to give it a go, which is one of my biggest weaknesses, so I guess I'm still learning that one. As a kid at the cabin, we always feel that like we had a fear of anything electrical, which made the cabin a great place for us. While initially completely without electricity, you took on the admirable task of both electrifying and adding flush toilets to the cabin, which was really a game changer. We remember visiting as kids and watching you up on the roof, solar panel in one hand, mysterious tool in the other, thinking to ourselves, wow, it's pretty badass. But also, simultaneously, I really hope he knows what he's doing. Nevertheless, the lights mostly turned on and the toilet usually flushed. So therefore, you don't have to be an expert to give it a go. This is true in all aspects except maybe in diagnosing broken bones. I learned this personally the hard way with an unfortunate ATV accident at the cabin, where I was told by my decorated doctor grandfather that it'll be fine and I should walk it off. This message reflected his can-do spirit and his ability to fight through adversity. Unfortunately, that wasn't entirely beneficial in this case because I had actually broken my leg. So, that's too bad.
I'll raise the mic after you, Fraser. So the third lesson from me is to find your passions, which I feel is very appropriate for someone who celebrated retirement and 80th birthday the same week. So as much as previously mentioned, you don't need to be an expert to give something a try. He also demonstrated the value and joy that can come from finding your passion, having your expertise, and sharing it with the world. And although, as been made very clear from this experience, your professional accomplishments were very rarely seen and experienced by us, there were occasions when we were able to catch a glimpse of your dermatological brilliance and the joy that you felt from sharing that with us and helping our lives. Whether that was when Annie was born with a super rad birthmark, you were the first one to come check it out and make sure that she was okay. Or when Ellie received mystery hives as a 7-year-old, you were on it with the cortisone cream. In my early 20s, when I was completely out of treatment options for my facial eczema and had been through many, I'm sure very talented other dermatologists and other GPs who had many suggestions, none of which worked. At 83 years old, 3 years after retirement, I asked for your suggestion on how to best deal with it. Your initial recommendation was a bullet in the head, but then you followed it up with tetracycline, which made no sense considering that is typically used in acne treatment. And no dermatologists or GPs I talked to after that had heard of that, but they thought, let's give it a go, and lo and behold, beauty. And so I think, so that dedication of the doctor, as John stole the anecdote, so at 83, while in the lodge, there was an incident where a fellow lodgee fell out of the chair and they were unable to call for help. You were able to keep their head up, making sure they wouldn't choke until help could arrive. And the nurses following that commented that you were beaming with pride and joy when thanked for your service. And a dedicated doctor through and through. And I think that's an important lesson to know is if we're all hoping that we can find professions where we approach that dedication and passion, we'll be very lucky.
Lower this again. Okay, so lesson 4. As you've heard from others, bringing a sense of humor wherever you go. Boy, oh boy, are you funny. Around our household, we lovingly whip out your holy cats catchphrase at every opportunity. I remember once taking you for a walk around the lodge and comparing the combination of the bumpy sidewalks and my amateur wheelchair pushing to a roller coaster, to which you lovingly, I think, followed up with some roller coaster worthy sound effects. Ah! That, or maybe you needed to pee. But I'll go with the roller coaster sound effects. They make a better story.
This lesson could just as easily be bring a sense of humor wherever you go and good snacks. So I don't have a lot of really early memories, but I remember you've always been a bit of a snack connoisseur. Whether driving up to Lillooet Lake with cheesies in the seat next to you, having s'mores down the beach, or munching on bits and bites, you were always well stocked with, the trademark snacks, licorice all sorts, Hawkins cheesies, maybe a Purdy's hedgehog. Also, you're one of the few who properly appreciate vanilla ice cream, often in the form of a white spot milkshake. One time at the lodge, I remember you were eating your beloved licorice all sorts, and upon hearing that a nurse was coming, you started scarfing down and tucking them into our hands, knowing that you weren't supposed to be eating them. I hope that you've still got those great snacks where you are now.
Okay, so lesson 5, the last lesson we'll share. Expiry dates are a suggestion, and refrigeration is overrated. So, along with a healthy fear of anything electrical at the cabin, as a kid, I think I had what was a healthy fear of anything coming out of the cabin cupboards. Not always one to pay heed to food safety suggestions, and having only an occasionally running propane fridge meant that there was always some questionable condiments brought out around dinner time. It was definitely a best before, fine after, refrigeration optional kind of situation. All that to say, to my knowledge, no one ever got sick. And a quick Google tells me that actually some mayonnaise you don't even need to refrigerate. So for all of you out there, go eat that expired yogurt that's been sitting in the back of your fridge for months. Forgo refrigerating your mayonnaise. Make Alastair proud. In all seriousness, we are so grateful and proud to have had you as our grandpa. In addition to these 5 lessons and many more, you also gave us each other. I'm so grateful for the family that I'm a part of, including my 4 cousins and siblings standing up here with me today, those of you out there in the audience, those who couldn't make it here in person, and those joining us in spirit. I have so much love for these wonderful people, and we have so much love for you. All our love, your grandchildren. Andrew, Fraser, Ellie, Annie, Cameron, and Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was amazing. Now, if anybody else would like to come up and share a brief story or memory about Alastair, that would be fantastic. Oh, and you have the first volunteer.
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Brad, and I'm married to Alastair's eldest daughter, Sheila. I've had the good fortune to know Alastair for 43 years, since Sheila and I started dating in 1980. And I'd like to share a couple of reflections that I have of Alastair. In those first several years, our relationship was quite formal. He tolerated me out of love for Sheila, and we would work amicably enough on various projects at the McLeod family cabin. That formality melted away after it was apparent I was going to be hanging around. I'm not saying the melting happened right away. In fact, there were a couple of speed bumps along the way, like the time in my early 20s when, after much encouragement from Sheila, that I called him Alastair. It went something like this. Alastair, can you pass me the drill? At that point, he turned to me and said, "Dr. McLeod is fine." And it was fine for years to come. Bundled with this amazing talent as a doctor and dermatologist, Dr. McLeod knew his way around most any building trade and was not daunted by any DIY project at his beloved cabin. Alastair was the kind of guy you would want around if civilization suddenly ended, or if there was a zombie apocalypse and that meant people had to be self-sufficient. He even had a comprehensive plan to get everyone in the family to family cabin in case of catastrophe. Alastair knew plumbing, installing hot water tanks and toilets and showers and water lines. He was a cabin gas fitter, solar power technician, carpenter, electrician, tiler, to name a few. He was also, of course, a field emergency physician, stitching up son Bob, as he earlier said, with his DIY stitches, and then getting a proper suture kit to stitch up Sheila's scalp 5 years later. He would also administer verbal placebos to our family's moles and rashes with the prognosis of, "It's fine, you're okay." And as mentioned by the grandkids, Alastair also displayed a strong Scottish resource management skill, which is, of course, important in a calamity, conserving Kraft salad dressings and condiments in a cupboard at the cabin for years past their best before date. And a final skill I watched Alastair try to master was communicating with his much-loved dogs. They understood dinner and walk, but after a nocturnal accident, he never quite understood that, or the dogs never quite understood what pee-pee paper meant while he shook his newspaper and pointed out where they should have taken care of their business. Alastair will be truly missed by me and his family, colleagues, and many who came into contact with him. I'm reminded as I smile at these memories and reflect on Alastair's life that it was Cicero who said, "The life of the dead is placed in the memory of the living." Thank you.
Thanks, Bradley. Was there anybody else that wanted to come up and say a few words? There we go. This will be a very few words. I'm David Zloty. I was one of Alastair's residents through 91 through 94, I believe. And there's just been so much said about how nice he was. I think I need to counteract that. He was a hard, harsh, no bullshit teacher. One episode is when I failed to return to St. Paul's Hospital to complete a consult after our 5 p.m. teaching sessions. So the next morning I was with him. He confronted me on this and I was giving him my blah blah excuses. And he just shut me down and said, "No, really, you're being lazy and unprofessional." And I was kind of taken aback, but I knew not to kick an awakening junkyard dog. So I reflected on it for the next year, and I realized he was right. You know, those kind of statements he made and those behaviors kind of taught me, I'm sure many others in this room, what it meant to be a resident, what it meant to be professional and exhibit professional behavior, and what it meant to be a physician with a touch of humanity. So even though he was gruff, he certainly impacted a lot of powerful lessons, and I just wanted to thank him for that.
Thanks. Yeah. It's all about the lessons. Is there anybody else that had an inclination to wander up? Come on up.
I'm Roberta Nowakowski, and he was a neighbor of ours up at Little Lake. Lovely man. And always, always remembered his laugh, And my husband's last name Nowakowski, he would call my husband Navi. Yeah. And after he had his stroke, he would get around by, he bought a quad, and he would get around by going on his quad, and you would hear his quad start up in the morning, and then he would slowly and about 15 minutes later, he would show up at our place. That's all I had to say.
Thank you so much. Obviously lots of fond memories about Lillooet Lake by everybody. Was there anybody else that had a inclination for feud? Come on up.
Hi there. I am Will. I'm Liz's fiance, and I had a grave misfortune of really only knowing Alastair the last 3 years of his life. But fortunately, he couldn't talk, and that's a blessing according to Brad. What amazed me most about Alastair, even though he was nonverbal at this time and in a wheelchair, was how funny he was. Completely non-verbally, through his gestures, through his smile. I very much remember my first time meeting him, going for dinner with Diane and Liz, which became our little Tuesday rituals. And just through his gestures and his non-verbal facial cues, you could pick up, and I'm not sure everyone here believes in the soul, but if you do, you can still see the soul of the man imprinted, unfortunately, on the kind of physical cage and mental cage of him. But what made me realize this was after I got used to driving him home, back to his care home from Diane's house at the time, was how he would respond to my driving in the car. And if anyone knows me, I learned to drive in London, and so if you see a gap, you go for it. It's that simple. What always made me laugh was how he'd always be disappointed if I didn't go across that yellow line, and he'd turn to me and look and sort of like not impressed if I would get round some unknown driver in front of us. And the fact that however long I knew him, he could always knew the direction back to his house, and that's I don't know, it just sort of made me realize that even if you may feel caged or angry at, the physical limitations of yourself, that the soul deep inside is still present, and he never stopped being the man who he always was. And in the short time I got to know him, I feel blessed. I'm sure all you do as well. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else that wanted to have comment?
I'm Betty Marshall, and I've crossed the McLeod family in many directions, from looking after Lizzie when she was a little girl, and Diane being a good friend. We call ourselves the young mum, so that's how far back we go. But I'd like to speak to Alastair as my doctor. And I love the pictures just looking at them, because many of them I don't know, but there's one in there where Alastair is looking at his cell phone. Oh my God, if I had my cell phone in sight and I was in his office, there was going to be hell to pay. I think the secretaries would actually confiscate it, just in case you might beep or something, because no cell phones. Anyhow, so I'm really delighted in that. But as a doctor, I didn't know what he was doing, but I trusted him implicitly. And he sort of said, well, we're just going to make you allergic to this, and then we'll give you this, and then it'll be all okay. And it was all okay, but after he was no longer my doctor, I take those formulas and try and get them reproduced, and there's just no doctor or compounding place that would make a little potion that he gave me. So not only do I miss the potion, but I miss Alastair a lot, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
there anybody else that wanted to say a word?
Yes, I would, but I can't get up there easily,
No
so
worries.
I'll speak loudly from here. Alastair and I began our practices in dermatology at the same time. He had come back from Minnesota, I'd come back from Oregon, and he was a remarkable guy. His sense of humor, his involvement in things around him, so impressive. We became quite close. And I, like the others, was dazzled by his humanity, by his intelligence, by his humor, his way to express himself in a common man's terms. He was a master of that. But one of my main memories of him is one afternoon, or evening, I forget now, and I guess it was 1977 or 78, when his limbs left him. We received a phone call at home. Can I come over? Such a thing had never occurred before. We'd visited at home and socially, but he did come over. And he told us that limbs had left. And he broke into tears. That was a very remarkable occurrence for me in the day that men didn't express their emotions. Freed me up to express mine as well thereafter. We went on to a deepening friendship and relationship professionally. And I miss him very much. He was a lovely man. And I loved him dearly.
Very nice, thank you very much. Is there anybody else that had a few words? Nope. Pardon.
Well, first I would just like to say thank you so much to the McLeod family for hosting this, because sometimes it's not so trendy for people to have services or to have events. They want to do it privately, and I can understand that, but it is so nice for us to be able to come together, have some closure, share thoughts and memories. And I know last weekend, the Dermatology Society of BC had our regular fall meeting, and we paid tribute to Alastair then. And I just wanted to tell you a quick story from my recollection that I agree with Dr. Hong and Drs. Lottie, David, and Chiho. And he was a tough faculty member, a very tough supervisor. And I remember being reamed out for not coming back to the hospital to see a late night consult. But I learned from that. But there was a time when I was quite intimidated by Alastair. He was very tough standards. You knew he was right, but he was tough. And so, but you knew that he had the answer and he knew what to do. So I remember one time in my clinic, I was working on a patient, and I poked myself with a needle. And this was during the time when HIV and AIDS was very much a huge issue, much bigger than now, of course. And when something happens to you, you stop being objective. And I just panicked. I just thought, oh my God, what should I do? I got a whole bunch of patients, a busy waiting room. My staff were saying, get a move on, right? You've got to close out the clinic. And I didn't know what to do. And I was panicking, so oh my God, something bad had happened to me because this needle stick injury. And I knew there was only one person I could call. Only one person that I could call, and that was Alastair McLeod, because Alastair knew what to do. He knew what to do. So, but there was a part of me that was intimidated because I thought, oh my goodness, is he going to yell at me? Because it's like what he did when I didn't come back for that consult. He was going to say, you should know better than you should know what to do. Why are you phoning? But anyway, I thought, I can't move on. I cannot get through the rest of my day until I get this sorted out. So I phoned him. And his secretary put him through instantly, and he talked to me. And he said, well, what happened? And I explained exactly what happened. He said, okay, well, what's the patient? I explained all of this, and he took care of me. And he said, okay, well, you should do this and this and this. And I followed his instructions, and I was able to get on with the rest of my day. But he was a dermatologist. He took care of me. I felt very much cared for by him. And it's the one thing about Alastair, he was tough, but boy, when you needed him, he was there for you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Harvey. You was calm and taking care of the issues. Is there anybody else that wanted to come up and share a few words? In which case, I'd ask Sheila to come up and give us a story and lead us in the song.
Oh, I don't know if I need the song.
You have the microphone.
So, and I alluded to in my comments, in the last couple of months of Dad's life, we would, I wheel him over to the dog park and we would sit, and I took up this thing of, singing to him. And so I would pull out my phone, and I had a full repertoire of songs that I would sing to him, like, Blowing in the Wind and some great classics. And Amazing Grace, we came upon Amazing Grace. And for whatever reason, I would sing Amazing Grace, and then I said to Dad, oh, Dad, I really like Amazing Grace. And, do you like Amazing Grace? And Dad actually nodded, because Dad didn't do very often. Like, this would be nonverbal, and he would actually nod. I said, oh, wow, I was really blown away. And then I said, well, would you like me to sing it again? And he nodded again. I was even more blown away. So there we would sing, I would sing Amazing Grace to him over and over again in the book. So I thought it would be really lovely, because Dad was not a religious guy, so it did blow me away that Amazing Grace would be his choice of, within my amazing repertoire. And so I would ask the family to come up, and we had Amber's on his guitar, and I would, it would be wonderful if we could all join in and sing Amazing Grace, Dad, and let them know how much we love them, and that would be good one. That's why I'm not leading the song. But everyone sit down. With all you guys go. Okay, come on up. No one's getting nervous.
And thank you for all for coming this afternoon to share these personal tributes to Dad. We have the space until 5 o'clock. So, something to eat, something to drink. Please share some further conversations and memories. Thanks again.